Yes, it's one of those where I had the feeling I need to bring the ex along. Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Angela. And today's video is about a very particular type of character, and that is fighting women. And by this I mean women who fight with weapons more so than with magic. Let's get into this, well, maybe a little bit unusual roundup, because normally my roundups are centered around genres or around themes. So today, a little character roundup. Now, fighting women have a very, very long tradition, and we find them in several cultures and several literatures. And one that we find as one of the prototypes is definitely Norse literature, and here particularly the sagas and the Eddas, so all the way back to the Middle Ages. And my first modern example goes back to that type of literature, especially the Volsung saga, where we find Brunhild, who is like a shield maiden. She's also a Norse princess, and she doesn't want to marry just any bloke, but only a man who can defeat her, in combat, but also in a set of contests that are about who can run faster, who can throw a spear wider, and none of the men that line themselves up to defeat her is able to do so until Gunther and Siegfried arrive, and they manage to do so, but only by cheating. And we find this story and this prototype of a fighting woman in Kate Heartfield's Valkyrie. Valkyrie are women characters, mythological women characters, that swoop down onto the battlefield and select the heroes that are then honored to be in Valhalla with Odin in his great hall. And Brunhild is one of those Valkyrie in Kate Heartfield's story. And she's a very compelling character, because not only do we just get this fighting woman, but also a lot of inner thought and about how fighting actually shapes her and what it's doing to her, and also the burden that comes with being a Valkyrie, having to actually decide who deserves hero status and who doesn't. And so we get a lot of inner thought, and the book has like two voices in it. So we get Brunhild, and we get her counterpart Gudrun. Gudrun is a princess, so not a fighter, but we get both women's voices from a first narration perspective. And what this does is that, yes, it's confusing at times while we think, oh my God, what chapter are we in? But it also shows us that those women who come from different backgrounds have very different ideas about their identity and who they are. They start to slightly blend into each other and become much, much closer than we might think at first. And I personally like this narrative device. I know some persons don't like to read stuff from first person's perspective, but I think in this case it really works very, very well. And as I say, I like this take on Brunhild, this medieval woman character that is reshaped here into something that's much closer to us. The book, of course, also has a little bit of, let's say, feminist criticism and how women are treated, how success is maybe taken away from them. And we have Brunhild reflecting on this as well. And telling us that this incident that, let's just say, involved a dragon might not have taken place the way that medieval sources might make us believe. So overall, I think this is quite a good and interesting, new take on Brunhild from the Icelandic Volsung saga. Staying with Norse-inspired fighting women, my next example comes from John Gwynne's Bloodsworn Saga. This is the first volume, Shadow of the Gods. Here we have two female POV characters who both are fighters. One is Elva, she is part of a Viking warband, and the other one is Orca. So for my roundup today, I would like to concentrate on Orca. Not that Elva isn't done very well, but I find Orca interesting because Orca is also a mother. And we have only very few mothers in fantasy to start with. A mother who's also a badass fighter is even rarer. I know there are a couple, like there's for example one in Sword of Kaigen, but as I say, we can't find them that often. So hence Orca. As I say, Orca is a mother. Is she always the perfect parent? Probably not. But then none of us is actually rearing children in a war zone. So that probably would change our outlook on parenting quite a bit. Because when we encounter her the very first time, she's actually quite severe on her son. But I think it comes from a well-meant point where she wants him to toughen up a bit more because he ultimately has to fend for himself and be able to survive in a very tough world. So it's not that she's without love and doesn't display love to her child, but there is a toughness to her that's not leaving her. Also, when I said in my intro, these are characters that predominantly fight with weapons, not with magic. Orca has some magic to her, which kind of like unfolds a bit more when the book and also the series progresses. But I think at first she herself is not necessarily aware of that either. So this is my second choice, Orca from the Bloodsworn saga. My third example is still Norse inspired, and she comes from Philip Chase's Edan trilogy. This is the last volume, Return to Edan. The Edan trilogy has a lot of very compelling female characters. They're all very well done. We have Sequara, for example, who is, conceptualized as a likable character. Now, she's not a weapons fighter, so she does not qualify for my roundup here, nor does Zaren, an absolutely gem of a character. But no, for my roundup, I'm picking Skuld. Skuld is again from a Norse-inspired tribe, and she is fierce. She's a fierce fighter. She gets stuck in there with her sword, and failing that, she also gets stuck in with her fist. So she is, ferocious and not very likable because she is very scary the way she is presented. We see her fight, and seeing Skuld fight is not pretty. Skuld also is not depicted or described as a pretty woman. She has scars. She has scars on her face that she kind of like got while fighting. But she has very high status in her society, partly because her brothers are clan leaders, but she has status in her own right because she is such a revered fighter. What I found interesting about Skuld, and don't get me wrong, myself and Skuld, we will never be really besties. She has, as I say, she has a really scary core. But despite all of this, Skuld finds love, on the battlefield. And she's the one who kind of like declares, no, you there, meet me in my tent later when all this is over. And we get a little bit of this tent scene where we basically get her described through her partner's eyes. And he describes her as beautiful, despite her scarred body. Actually, that is like woven into the attraction almost. So I found Skuld a very compelling fighting character that's not so cookie cutter mold or just a flipped female warrior trope, but there is kind of like a dimension to Skuld that a lot of female characters that are modeled on those fighters do lack sometimes, and that is why she is on my list here. As I say, like we see her on the battlefield and they encounter one of their fallen comrades, and Skuld is the one who says, we will not grieve, we will fight, we want revenge. No? So we have that fierceness to her, and then we see her kind of like, I don't know, on a bear skin with her lover. And I think that's a very interesting contrast and also well written, by the way. My next example also goes back to medieval sources, but more to the medieval tropes of knighthood. And that's Brienne of Tarth from A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. So there are a lot of fighters in this epic saga as far as we have it. We have Daenerys, we have also Arya. Arya is again a woman, or trying to want to be a woman, who's a fighter and also is working on her sword skills. But for my purposes here, I'm going with Brienne of Tarth. The reason being, I think she's very well done because, again, she's a very multifaceted character. No? We see her trying to very fiercely cling to the honor code of the knight and try to live by this, try to embody this, despite being a woman. And yes, we see her kind like, yeah, also wanting love, but knowing that love in this conventional way, like being married off by her father and being just a pawn in a power play, will not suit her. But that doesn't mean that she can't feel love. No, she kind like displays love in very, let's say, faceted ways as well. No? So we see her fall in love with Stannis in a way, and trying to express this by wanting to protect him, but then also later with Jaime. No? So again, a multifaceted character who is a fighter, but also so much more. With my next example, we're even further away from those Norse models we started off with. And that's Eiko from Ian C. Esslemont's Paths of Ascendancy, especially the first one here, Dancer's Lament. Eiko is, yeah, she's part of a whole unit of sword fighting women who act more or less as bodyguards and go back to something like those armies of the Amazons, for example. I can see them as one inspiring myth behind this idea of Eiko. Again, yes, she's a fighting woman, but also she is a character, again, that has other facets, other dimensions to it, especially the interactions between the other fighters in this unit are done very, very interestingly in this book. And we also find, yeah, this whole idea of kind of like wanting advancement, the infighting, but also kind of like the doubts that might come with that. And they're all very well portrayed. So when Eiko and her fighting comrades are introduced to us, we get them from Eiko's point of view. And I might just read that bit out to you. It's like a sentence only. Eiko returned her wandering gaze to the armored back before her as they marched the streets in rank. 20 of King Culalorn's legendary troops of sword dancer bodyguards. All female, all virgin. So this particular detail Eiko knew for a complete myth. So yeah, it's introduced in this very kind of almost horny trope and then immediately dismantled. And I really like this about Esslemont and his writing in general, but when he depicts female characters in particular, and I think Eiko is definitely a winner in that respect. When I talk about Esslemont, I of course have to also mention the other Melarson author, Stephen Erikson. And like Eco is almost like a stand-in for the rest of the 20 of her comrades in this unit. My pick from Melarson Book of the Fallen is also a stand-in for a lot of, female fighters, female sword fighters, and also the female sappers in the Melarson armies, especially the bridge burners. And my example in this respect is Pika and her story arc in Memories of Ice. Pika, again, as I say, she is part of the bridge burners. I think she has the rank of a lieutenant, and she is put in charge of the bridge burners at the siege of Coral. And if you've read this, you know how that ends. And what I like about Picker is, yes, she gets a rough deal in a way, but her resilience. And I think that's characteristic of a lot of female characters that we encounter in Melarson, that they all show this resilience, this kind of like, wanting to do the right thing or their duty at all costs, but also being survivor and being very resilient after they've survived. And we see this in Pika as well. And already what I mentioned also a little bit with Esslemont's example, Eco, Pika as well. Pika doubts herself. Pika is not necessarily always able to ascribe success to herself. And if it's kind of like given to her or ascribed to her from the outside, from other characters, she's still doubting herself. And I think this is one of the things that has stood out for me with Ms. Larson in all the volumes I've read so far, that Erikson is very well able to write doubt, especially when it comes to power constellations. In some respects, the Melarson Book of the Fallen, of course, has power as one of its central themes as well. We see this doubt with male and female characters, but I also would give it to Erikson that he's one of the very few male authors who really can write female self-doubt in a convincing way. And I think that's another reason that makes Pika such a wonderful character. My next character is again a trailblazer, a kind of prototype fighting female character. Going back to, again, a bit of a different tradition, and this is C.L. Moore's Jerial of Joiry. There are lots of kind of short story collections where we encounter this character. One of the more famous one is The Black God. C.L. Moore was a contemporary of Robert E. Howard and well familiar with his Conan stories, for example. And this is what she then kind of like, well, I wouldn't say use as a template, but subverts in a really nice way, because Jerial of Joiry is, a bit of a gender-flipped Conan, but again, with a lot of extras. No, it's not just, the fighter is female. No, it's not like a sword fighter with extra bits like boobs. No, again, we get problems that probably male fighters wouldn't encounter, and Jerial does reflect on them. And if you think that this character is kind of like very, very early in the development of fantasy literature, especially in that period where we always think, well, were there even women writing this type of literature? Yes, there were. And C.L. Moore is one of them. And I think Jerial is such an interesting and well done character. Again, multifaceted, but also a trailblazer. I think without this character, we probably wouldn't have so many wonderful fighting women in today's literature. And that also goes for my next example, and this is Nyx from the Beldame Apocrypha trilogy by Kameron Hurley. Nyx is very interesting as well because, yeah, she is a bit of a mishmash of all those traditions that we have seen so far. In the first of the trilogy, God's War, we're introduced to a very, yeah, sparse post-apocalyptic war scenario type of world where we have a holy war going on that interestingly is not this usual crusade modeled war between Christians and Muslims, but here both factions are modeled on Islam, and one part actually women are the dominant gender, and men count almost for nothing. So it's a very gender flipped world in general. And yeah, Nyx is a mercenary, and her outfit, the Beldames, they are sent out to the front line to hunt down male deserters. Yeah, when we encounter her, she is also kind of pondering a very, how shall I say, female dilemma in a way, because the world she lives in, any type of genetic material is highly priced. And to make ends meet, she sells her womb. Yeah. No, so we have already right from the start a scenario that cannot apply to any male fighter. Now, overall, I find Nyx a little bit more one-dimensional than the characters I've been talking about so far. But there is development. There is a little bit more to her than, again, just being gender flipped. So yeah, I think she does deserve her place on a list like that, because overall I enjoyed reading about Nyx, and I actually have to go back to the trilogy and read the last two books to see kind of like, yeah, is there more character development and how does her character arc continue. My next example is more on the light-hearted side. It's Angua from the Discworld novels by Terry Pratchett. We encounter her first in Men at Arms. She is a member of, or becomes in this book, a member of the City Watch. And yeah, she's quirky, she's strong, she's a fighter, and she's a werewolf. So yeah, a bit an unusual perhaps combination, but I really enjoyed Angua. Also, she saves the day many a time. Again, Terry Pratchett, one of those writers who's really good at writing characters, really good at writing female characters. My favorite from the Discworld is probably Lady Sybil. And of course, the witches are just delightful as well. But when it comes to fighting women, I would say Angua from the Discworld is up there with the rest of them. And my last example, yeah, she breaks the mold in so many respects, and that is Nona from Mark Lawrence's Book of the Ancestor. Nona is very interesting because we have, yeah, a character who develops as a fighter, and we actually follow her fight training, so to say, when she enters the convent of Sweet Mercy. Also, when we meet Nona first, she is a child. I think she's introduced at about 8 years of age. But Lawrence manages to pull this off without this being, how shall I say, cringe or drifting off into middle grade or something like that. Nona is a child with a very rich inner world and very deep thoughts at times. Nona also breaks the mold a little bit because Nona's fighting abilities are very closely linked to the magic in this world. So she's not this pure fighter type that does completely without magic. But I just love Nona. I had to include her in a way. I think she's a very successful character. I think the women in Book of the Ancestor, it's easily one of the series that has a predominantly female cast, but they're all done very well. So yes, great marks all around, and yes, I love Nona. Okay, let me know what's your favorite female fighter that you have encountered in fantasy or sci-fi literature. Let me know below in the comments, and as always, happy reading and all the best.